Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar today about getting started with Power BI. To take you through the session, Bill Coleman, who's the principal consultant in our BI practice, will be outlining what you can do and how to get going with BI technology and Power BI. Just a little bit of housekeeping. First up, we'll be going through the session, but please do send through questions as we progress, because there'll be hopefully some time for them at the end. My name's Rory McNeil, and I'm the marketing manager here at Superfluid. So just to quickly give those online a brief overview of who Superfluid are, if you've not heard of us before. We're a wholly owned subsidiary of Brennan IT. We were founded in 2010, and we work with Australian organisations to provide them with applications and advice that will enable them to improve the services that they offer their customers, as well as how they operate as a business themselves. We work with organisations across various sectors, partnering with them to identify their needs and adopt solutions that focus on their kind of long-term goals and success. Our kind of mantra is that we'll do that without overspending, overcomplicating, or limiting your horizons. Now, the way that we do this is we have three separate practices set up to support you with those endeavours. Firstly, that focus on the customer experience, so providing solutions such as CRM, marketing automation, or self-service portals. We also have a practice designed to look at the digital workplace, so very much about how you're operating as an organisation internally and what you can do to improve efficiencies and the collaboration and innovation there. Finally, and the bit that we'll be kind of focusing on obviously today is the data and insights practice. So looking at BI technology, in particular with Power BI and ClickView solutions, as well as being able to provide you with data warehousing and other services that are designed really for you to get the most out of your data, draw insights out of that, and then make future strategic data-driven decisions. So without further ado, let me pass you over to Bill Coleman, who will take you through the rest of the webinar. Bill, over to you.
Thank you very much, Rory, for that. And thanks to everyone for attending today. Hopefully, I'll be able to cover off some topics that are of particular interest to people and throw some enlightenment on this subject. So we'll be going through a brief introduction to what is BI, taking it from the top first of all. Then we'll be talking about what self-service BI is in particular, and why is Microsoft's Power BI the one that seems to be really getting traction in the market at the moment, and why are a lot of people looking to that to be the solution. We're going to take a look then at a quick demo. I'm going to walk you through some of the features and point out some of the interesting aspects that you might be curious about with regards to Microsoft Power BI. And then I'm going to jump back in and talk about some challenges and what are the problems, because it's all very well when you are painting a very nice little rosy pictured garden, but when it comes down to it, there's going to be some real difficulties involved in getting from A to B. So I'll walk through that. I'll walk through how do we typically approach solving for these problems, and how does that result in a solid roadmap that's going to get you to where you need to go. And we'll just talk a little bit about the Superfluid Power BI Quickstart product, and then I will open up the floor for questions. So I'll just jump straight in now, and let's talk a little bit about what exactly is business intelligence. Well, we're in a really interesting time. I mean, not so long ago, people were talking about the paperless business of the future, and now we're into a place where we've not only done away with the paper, but we've created so much data that we practically don't know what to do with it. You can't swipe in and out of your own office these days without creating an audit trail, and there's all this information out there that's up for grabs, and people are a little bit sort of hesitant to jump in and start taking a look at all of that data, because there's just so much, it's hard to know where to start. We've got, most basic businesses will have, at the very least, they'll have some kind of a customer database, a CRM. They'll have some sort of transactional information like a POS system, or they'll have inventory or stock management, and they'll have their financial package in Xero or MyOb or whatever financial they're using, and there'll be internal stuff in the HRM system. and there'll be industry-specific database backend things that people will need to be across in their own particular business. And then there's a swamp of Excel spreadsheets out there just floating around with random data in them. And traditionally, we're sort of used to being able now at this point in time, we've moved on enough that we can go to the supporting website for a product or open up the application and we can run some canned reports out of it to, look at what the inventory is or look at what those pause transactions were or take a look at the current state of the financials. That's all really very great. There's even dashboards now that are sort of interactive that are all established on these various different platforms. But when it comes down to it, when it's time to actually integrate this data, a lot of people are stuck in a world of actually just crunching numbers in spreadsheets. Vast numbers of VLOOKUPs and all kinds of complicated formulas linking one sheet to the next to another workbook until you pyramid up all the information you need. And every month it's a slog to get to your final month-end data. So that's what it's about. It's about trying to get all of that information, join it all up, and create a sort of a self-service environment where people have a single point of interest that they can go to and just ask the question that they need to know in real time without having to worry about what's the right report for this or what's the right way to calculate this particular KPI, where after it's all supposed to be there pre-canned and just ready to go. And that's the goal of self-service BI. It's to empower people to understand their business by looking at the data and to take away the difficulty involved in doing that. So really, when you do that, you find yourself with a whole lot of benefits coming out the far end of it. For a start, just very simply, you're going to reduce a lot of time and effort because a lot of people spend a substantial portion of their job in that spreadsheet world I was alluding to earlier on, where they're just bolting together these figures. I once did work, for example, for a particular bank that was doing all of their bank reconciliations manually, and it caused such an overhead for them that employees were quitting. People didn't want to have to deal with that, and they weren't able to, start to use all of these things that they had learned about finance and banking and start doing the analytical and the important work. They were just stuck bolting together figures, and that can be quite frustrating. I've also seen places where there's numbers and numbers of people, up to 40 people on a single floor, spending more than 50% of their time on average just trying to get together all the pieces of information they needed in order to build the reports that were needed. So that's really not a very helpful place to be, and it's not a very healthy place, and it's not very good from the point of view of being able to respond quickly as well, which is a huge aspect of what comes out of this kind of a process when you move through. You find yourself being able to actually ask these questions in real time. What is this KPI? What's it doing right now? What is the figures that's leading up to it? And if I slice it by region, what does it look like? And you can continue to ask these questions in an iterative way without being locked into having to go back and recalculate everything from first principles again. Another massive boost as well, which is one that kind of goes under the radar, but it's incredibly important, is maintaining a consistent language and vocabulary across the business. When I say my definition of a business measure, is it the same thing that my work colleagues are using? For example, if my KPI is to move X widgets per month, and I take a week off work, for example, I'm on annual leave, thank God, finally, and I come back, now am I in a position where my KPI has dipped because I've been away, or does the KPI adapt for that and we just take that week out of the equation? Now, whether or not you do that isn't really so important as whether everybody is doing it. When I go to talk to my boss then at the end of the quarter and we're talking about my bonus, did I meet the KPI or not? And we both might have a different answer to that question, and that is really damaging for a business, particularly when you extrapolate that over time and you're trying to see what the trend is. You can't really trust whether you're going up or down versus history if you're not measuring things consistently. So giving that ability to people to go to the central location, ask questions in a controlled environment where they can trust the answers they're getting are consistent for the whole business, and they can see everything they need to in that one place, really opens up a lot of power for your individuals. Which leads to the question then of why Power BI specifically? Well, there's a lot of different options out there, and Microsoft Power BI is just one of them. But if you take a look at the slide I'm showing at the moment, you can see the situation as it was 4 years ago versus why it is now. And that starts to paint the picture a little bit. Like, for example, 4 years ago, it was all very, very cluttered, and where you want to be is the top right-hand corner in terms of ability to execute and completeness of vision. But we had a lot of people competing in that space and no real clear standouts. For example, there was IBM there, and if we look now, where's IBM? And we can even look at the more sort of the smaller, the startup-y type ones, for example, TIBCO. Where are they? So you've got all of these various different platforms that started out with promise and all sold a similar set of ideas and values, but only a few of them over time have been picked up and are really able to execute and deliver on those promises. So we're sort of left with Microsoft, Tableau, and Qlik. Qlik, by the way, is another fantastic product, but that could be an entire presentation by itself. One of the great things about Microsoft Power BI is the way it integrates seamlessly with the stack. You all use Microsoft products to some extent, and you know that when you get the Power BI environment, it's just going to plug and play. There's not going to be any question about it. And not only that, they have made a huge effort to supply a whole lot of connectors under the hood. So if you download Power BI, you open it up, you want to point it at, for example, SurveyMonkey, and you just want to see very quickly what's the latest survey results coming in, you can just fire it open, use the SurveyMonkey connector, connect up, pull down the data, and get the results out. So it's really good for that kind of ad hoc analysis of various different potential data sources that you might not necessarily have in your data warehouse. But this is the real killer as far as I'm concerned. It's the ease of use, because don't forget that the focus of what we're really talking about here is self-service. It's not about the be-all and end-all magic bullet solution that's going to do everything. It's about what can users actually pick up and realistically be expected to learn and put into action on a daily basis. So Microsoft have been quite clever about the way they've approached the product, and they've taken the humble beginnings of Power BI, where it was initially just Power Pivot, and they've kept all of the aspects of that people are familiar with, all of those sort of pivot table type fields, and they've integrated that into this reporting platform, which then puts people straight away into a very familiar environment, and it removes a lot of the fear and uncertainty and doubt for novice users just starting and picking it up for the first time. And they're constantly adding to it as well. Like, for example, one of the great features that I've got a little screenshot of here is the ability to do a natural language query. You can just open up a Q&A session and start typing a question. And if you've designed your underlying data mart correctly, you'll start getting answers to that question in real time as you type on displays on the screen. So that's incredibly powerful as well, particularly for someone like a C-level executive who doesn't really want to be investing huge amounts of time in spreadsheets and creating their own reports, but might have a question they want to very quickly ask and doesn't exist on a current report. So they can just go straight to there and start typing, and hey presto, you start getting your answers real quick. So that's a good jump off point, I think, to maybe start going into our demonstration. So Power BI essentially is composed of two parts. We have the desktop application, which you're looking at here, and we have the suite of online services, which I'll go into shortly. So to start with the desktop application, straight away, you can see that it's a very, very typical dashboard type situation. We have a bunch of familiar chart types, and we've got interactions between those chart objects. So we can, for example, in this particular demo, drop down our little drop box and select March as being the month we're interested in. And we can see all of the various different high-level figures that are appropriate for the business in March. And then we can start doing interesting things, like we can click on a sales rep, and we can see what portion of those figures was made up by that particular rep. So what you get is a giant filtering engine that allows you to drill in on things that are of particular interest to you. So I've clicked on Alfreda, and we can see the pipeline for her as it stands versus the rest of the outer pipeline, which is a really interesting and powerful thing to be able to do. Or we can go the opposite direction. We could start on a product, for example, Super Widget. And now we can see by clicking on that, what are the reps that are selling this, and what does that look like? So this is the very basic essence of it. Everything from this point on is a sort of an elaboration on a theme, but you can see that that gets very powerful very quickly. Let's do another couple of click arounds. For example, let's click on this guy because he's absolutely killing it in terms of sales revenue versus target. And let's look down at the sales campaign. So we can see that this person has sold most of their things on the back of radio ads. But if we were to click on, say, Trixie, who's also doing quite well, but not as well, you can see radio ads don't even feature in her sales. It's all about the out and about campaign. So that might start raising some questions for you depending on what you're trying to do in your organization. So in order to answer those questions, maybe there isn't enough information on this dashboard at the moment. Maybe we need to do a little bit more analysis and find out exactly what's happening. So let's open out some of the tools, and we will start actually playing with the data a little bit. And I can show you how an experienced user in Excel will be able to manage this quite well. So I'm going to create a new tab at the bottom, and I'm going to go over to my sales rep table. I'm going to click rep name, and I'm going to turn that into a slicer object. Now, a slicer object is just a series of checkboxes, and we can use that to just put a little check in the box of whatever it is we want to look at specifically in isolation. And then we can go up and we can select another slicer. Let's drop the slicer first this time. And let's throw year and month into it. Now, I believe we were looking at March 2018. So now anything else that I put on here, I've just selected a table, is going to be specifically in relation to March 2018. So let's put in some of the interesting fields around that. We're interested in the campaign. We're interested in the industry. We're interested in what the company name was. And we might be interested in the current stage. That's what's the current step in the sales process. And we might be interested in what the realized value is. And realized value is just what Widget Co have decided that they want to call a sale value. Let's put in estimated value as well, so we get the ones that haven't been sold. Now we can see straight away that, well, hang on a sec, there's only one row here for radio ads. So that's why she hasn't been selling. She just doesn't have the leads. So that brings up a whole set of other questions related to, well, why doesn't she have the leads? And then you're starting to get into a position where you're empowered to ask the right questions. Now, say, for example, we want to bring her in later and actually have a talk to her and say, well, why do you think this is, and what do you think we need to be doing better? So let's take a look at what our sales has been like just generally over time, so we know what we're dealing with when she comes in for a chat. So we'll take off the month filter, and let's drag on the realized value into the values. Bear with me. And let's drop on the year and month onto the axis. And now we can see that this is her pattern of sales over the last while. So there's a couple of interesting features you can see. what happened in January and what happened in October? And more to the point, is that a part of a general trend in the business, or is this just that person's boom and bust cycle? So let's unselect her. And now we get the entire business as a whole, and we start to be able to ask intelligent questions about where does Trixie stand in relation to her colleagues. So this kind of interactive question and answer is really what Power BI is all about, especially for the power users, the people who are used to being in charge of creating all of these reports, and the people who want to be doing the analytics are perfectly capable of just clicking and dragging things real easy. I mean, let's, for example, just for argument's sake, throw campaign into the legend so that we can see in relation to that, and we'll go back to Trixie. So it becomes quite disjointed. She's been getting the campaign leads in a very inconsistent way. So that might be a part of an overall problem we want to look at. So this is what it's about. Now, I'll quickly show you as well the mobile phone UI. It's very easy to make these reports available for mobile phone viewing as well. So all we need to do is go up to our view and hit phone layout. Now you can see all of our fields on the right-hand side now have been replaced with all of the visuals that were on that sheet before. And you can just simply click and drag them across. So get the ones that are important, drag them across, and now you're building your own phone app for reporting. And this will work on most phone platforms. It's pretty generic and it's really powerful. Obviously here I'm in a designer mode, so I can't do the interactive part of clicking on all of the components and seeing what happens. But when you're using it through the app, obviously that's all enabled. A couple of other interesting things that you might want to quickly look at before I move away from the desktop designer is, first of all, this is the data model. Now, don't have to worry too much about this, but it is good to be aware of it. When you're creating a reporting environment, it really, really helps to be able to create a well-structured and well-thought-out data model to support it. And that means typically using a Kimball-style star schema. Now, this is a type of star schema called a snowflake, but that's not really important. The main thing to walk away from is to know that what you're dealing with is all of the facts of your organization. And you can think of facts as verbs, things that happened, anything that you can measure against time, against all of the nouns, all of the things that you're measuring, the products, the reps, the campaigns, the opportunities, all of that kind of thing, including the time slicers. And they all tie in nicely to the central definition of events as they happened. So that's sort of all you really need to know at this point, apart from the fact that you need to get this right. Another thing to note is that there is some security as well built into it. So if, for example, you want to only just allow people to see sales pertaining to their own region, that can be accomplished fairly easy by adding roles to the application. So we could create a role, we can call it New South Wales rep, and we can say the region equals NSW or something simple like that. And then we can assign people into those groups and make sure that when they log in, all they'll be able to see is a subset of the data that you want them to see, which can be quite important when you're producing generic reports across a large workforce base and you don't really want to show them everything. And I think that's where I'm going to leave the desktop application for the moment. We can come back to it later if people have specific questions. I'll jump now into the online portal. Now, it's an indication of where the Microsoft mindset is at, that they're referring to this as, the service interface. This is the service portal, as opposed to, the reporting portal. This is where you go to amalgamate all of the various different services that are available from the reporting platform. So each of the visuals, for example, on your report can be a part of a service. And this is where the distinction between a report and a dashboard comes in. If we're to take a look at a dashboard, now you'll notice that there's some visuals on there that you didn't see on the report, and they all belong to different reports. And they're all being presented on this dashboard in a service-based architecture. So it's a little bit like live tiles, except it's up to date with the information that's important to your business in a way that you've decided is the appropriate way to present it. And a dashboard is simply a collection of these tiles. Now the main difference is, if you're to say click on the map in order to see, well, what exactly is happening in New South Wales, it won't reduce the rest of the data. What it will do is it'll bring you straight to the map report, so you can go and ask those more targeted questions in context. And that will give you a better idea of what's going on and give you the ability to drill down through it. Another interesting feature that they've released recently is the Q&A. Now, I alluded to this earlier on, you might remember. This is the first time they've actually allowed the Q&A to be directly accessed from the reports as opposed to the dashboards. So I can do something like, show me opportunity value by region and product. Now that looks a little bit nasty. Maybe we should put it onto some sort of another chart. We'll say on a stacked column chart. And let's order it. I like to see things in descending order. Order by value, descending. And I forgot to put in the time scale, so let's go for financial year is, and let's select 1718. So that becomes a really powerful tool for someone who isn't necessarily going to be interested in creating reports or clicking and dragging things across the screen. They just want to go in and ask a simple question. It's part of the AI service platform that Microsoft are building out under Azure at the moment, and it's really getting a lot of traction. They're putting a lot of investment into it. And ultimately, we're going to be in a position where you can simply ask Cortana, and Cortana will be able to give you these answers directly. But that's a little ways down the road yet, as far as I know. A couple of other points of interest that you might want to know about. Everything is arranged into workspaces, and this goes back to our permissioning thing. So if you're using workspaces in your organization, you can assign reports and dashboards into that workspace, and only people who are members of that will then be able to go in to see the reports, regardless of what the role permissioning is that you've actually set up on the application itself. There are bookmarks you can enable as well. That's where are they hidden? I can't find the book. Oh, here we are. Bookmarks plain. We'll turn that on. So this enables you to create a set of filters and save it as a bookmark, and then share that bookmark with someone else. So say, for example, you've been doing a drill down through and you've found an interesting combination of filters that points at a particular problem or opportunity. You can bookmark that and share it out with other users of the report. And filters. We were showing you filters earlier on, but filters can be applied at a higher level as well. So if, for example, we want to take this dashboard and we only want to see this dashboard for everything in the FMCG sector. So this is all our FMCG leads. Or if we want to see just insurance, we can do that here. And it also goes for any other filters, any fields that you have that you want to be able to allow people to pivot the information based on can be put into the filtering, and that will allow them to be able to do that drill down. And this, of course, leads to a situation where your traditional build-up of proliferation of reports in the business isn't necessary. You don't have to create a version of a report for a specific set of circumstances and wind up with a whole rake of different reports that no one really knows what's in each one, and no one really trusts what's going to be brought up by it. You can simply go to the source and ask the question you need to know at that point in time, and you don't need to save it, or you can if you want, and that's the power of it. Another interesting feature as well is the ability to analyze it in Excel. So this goes back to what we were talking about with our power users. Anyone who's coming from a traditional Excel environment is going to be able to take your online dashboard and connect to it in a Power Query type way. And you'll see now in a moment all of those fields that we were dealing with in the desktop application are going to be available here. Now they've just popped up. So we can go, let's go to our date calendar, wherever that's hiding. Here we are. Let's throw in our year and month. And let's put in our end-to-end conversion rate. And there you go. Now we're able to report on conversion rate across time, just like that, in a familiar place. And this will also help you if you want to create formalized reports out of your data. A lot of people sometimes find that when they're using Power BI, they can be limited in how it visually presents, and they might have a particular look and feel that they need to be able to incorporate so they can put it into their board pack or whatever it is that's important. You can do that here quick and easy, just as if you're interacting with Power BI itself, and obviously it's the live data you're looking at. Final couple of things you might find interesting. You can, for example, create a refresh schedule. And it's quite simple. We're still in this world where we're using point and click programming. There's nothing complex to set up. You don't have to know how to program a cron job in Unix or anything mad like that. You can just open up this page and put in the times you want it to refresh and hit go. Other interesting things are alerts that you can configure. If, for example, you've got something that a benchmark that you don't want a figure to cross, you can set up an alert so if that figure is breached, it'll email it to the appropriate person. That's really about all I think we should be getting into at this level. I think if we go into any more detail, we'll get lost. So I'm going to jump back into the presentation, and we can circle back to any of that if people have questions at the end. So I promised you I'd talk about the challenges. And there are challenges, but they're pretty generic. It's the same sorts of challenges you'll find with most BI projects. First of all, trying to get alignment across your organization decision makers it can be really, really tough. You've got different departments working across different domains with different agendas, different levels of experience and different points of views. They've got different needs and different priorities, and there might be politics across the top of that. And add to the complications, there's different systems, and some of them can be like black box systems. No one really knows what's going on under the hood. And you can wind up in a place where you've got decision paralysis and you can't really sort of unite on a common way forward. And that can be a tricky barrier to get past. It often ends up in shadow IT projects being created, for example, which can be a good thing, but not necessarily all the time. It can be tricky as well to understand what you want to achieve, because the scope can get so big when you're looking at reporting, and there's so many different things Some of them are relevant, some of them aren't. What should we really be looking at? And what do we hope to get out of it at the end? What's the end goal? And what does success look like? How can you project manage something when you don't know what the end product is supposed to be doing or what it looks like? How do you know if you succeeded? And how can you even explain to a developer what it is that you want when you're relying on the developer to tell you what it is they can do? It becomes a little bit chicken and egg. So trying to get your thinking around all of that can be quite tricky. And as well as that, you can wind up in a situation with other problems getting flushed up. For example, data quality issues. Once you take the lid off a system, you might not be prepared for what you find. With that level of transparency that I was showing you, the ability to just dynamically ask questions and to drill down on any anomaly in the data when you see it in real time as it's important to you. If there's a problem, it'll be exposed pretty quickly. So it can help to be ready for those types of problems as well. Sometimes people aren't necessarily prepared for what they're going to find. And you have to make sure that it's a positive experience for the end user as well, which in traditional world means creating use cases and designing wireframes and defining the end user experience and making sure that all of these are known quantities before you go into a project. So trying to encapsulate the scope of an entire organization's data and turn it into a positive experience for an end user can be a little bit daunting. Exciting, but daunting. And also, we're in the real world here. We all have budget limitations and we all have a limited amount of time that we can commit to doing these things. So it's not all doom and gloom. It's all of this potential is waiting to be tapped, and we just have to try and figure out the way to approach it in order to be able to tap it properly. So that's where my advice is always to start small. If you can identify one KPI in your business, just one, that's even somewhat important, and it comes from a system of trusts. There's a system that you know that if you lift the lid on it, you're going to be reasonably comfortable with what the data is. You know where to go to get the fields that are going to compile up to the figure, and it doesn't really matter what it is. It could be a KPI such as conversion rate that we're looking at. It could even be something far more complex, like in the investment banking world, they'll be looking at return on equity. But if you know what equity means and you can define that, then you can start to ask those questions. So get your source of data that you trust, choose that one measure that you can build a dashboard around, and determine what your nouns are. Do you remember earlier on when I was describing the slicers in your business as being analogous to a noun? Your products, your people, timelines, departments, regions, anything that might be useful for you as a lens to put over the top of your data to be able to understand and dig through it in a way that actually gives you added value. That's your slicers. So when you know them, you're in a good position. And approaching it like this is something that makes all of those problems almost go away. You get alignment across organizational decision makers so much easier when you're working on a very focused job, when you know what the outcome is going to be at the end of it, because you've reduced the scope to something that people can digest and understand. Then you'll get the buy-in. And it'll be so much easier to understand what you need to achieve as well. So much easier to say to a developer, I want to get this figure based on this formula. It's going to come from this system using these fields, and I want to use these slicers or lenses across the top of it. And I want it to be built using a nice star schema. That's what I want to achieve. And that becomes an attainable goal. And things like data quality issues, you turn that automatically from being a negative to a positive. If you know that there's a system that has some problems with the underlying data and you have an idea of what to expect and you start with that system, then it proves you're right. And not only does it prove you, it shows you exactly where, and you'll be able to zero in on those problems and start to look at remedial action. And then you'll be able to see in process over time how it cleans up. And that can be a really encouraging and positive and rewarding process for the business to go through. And ensuring a positive end user experience obviously also becomes a lot easier because you've opened up the ability to use user stories like we were talking about. We can define a point of view and what you might expect to happen. So we can say a New South Wales sales rep can log in and see New South Wales. They can see their own stuff. They can see this, that, and the other, but they can't see this. And this is what it looks like. And you can wireframe that out if that helps. But more importantly, you can control the story. And also, because you're starting from that limited scope, you have a better idea of what the inputs are going to be required in order to get you there. So time and budget becomes something that you can manage just that little bit easier. And then from there, you just grow it out. This is what a typical BI cycle, I really believe, should look like. It makes very little sense to try and do everything all at once. It can be done. I've seen it done, but it's quite tricky. It can be often a lot easier if you start by picking something that you just want to measure, determine how to measure it, add the necessary components into your data structure to do that measurements, and then use the measurement. Use it to look at the past, use it to try and figure things out, use it to try and predict what's going to happen in the future, and use it to inform what are the things that you really need to know more about. So then you can move on to pick another measure. And you can start building out your capacity to report and self-service in an iterative way that makes sense and hits the right parts of the business and asks the right questions. So despite being an iterative and ongoing process, the journey actually turns out to be quite structured after all. And some people might recognize this as being very close to the continuous improvement cycle that Deming talks about, the plan, do, check, act cycle. It's more or less the same. You're planning what you want to measure, you're doing the measurement, you're checking it, and you're making actions based on it, and you're going back into the circle again. So to summarize, you identify that data source that you know you can trust. You load what you need for that information in, and you do all the transformations, and you build that lovely reporting model that I was showing you under the hood. And you make sure that that's built in a solid and reliable way. And you build very, very simple dashboards. And make sure that they're focused on their intent. Never really try to put too much information onto one report, but try and focus that report on one single aspect, and that will create a really usable and highly relevant piece of infrastructure in your business. So to get maximum buy-in, you got to make it easy to use. We've spoken a little bit about that, but taking this iterative approach definitely helps in terms of the ability to ring fence the use cases and the user groups, and doing this in an incremental way will help you to grow out that in a controlled manner so that you can get the buy-in, you can do it slowly. You don't necessarily have to dump everything on top of people all in one go. Make it necessary and helpful. It helps to be focused on what it is that you need to achieve, but also to make that important to the people who are going to be using it. So if you're to, for example, pick a KPI that people are going to be interested in checking, if they've got, professional development contingent on it, or dollars, or whatever it is that's important, and they're going to want to be able to go back and see where their KPI is at, but also see how their actions are impacting on it. And it almost becomes a gamification of their job in a way, where they go in every day, can see what they've done over the last 24 hours and can see what impact that has had on their KPI and have a stronger idea of what going forward is the recipe for success. One of the important things also to do is to really support your super users and the champions of the reporting in your business. So the example I give of this is Data Dictionary. Data Dictionary is very simply what it sounds like. It's a list of all of the fields that are available and what do they mean. And that might go right the way back to what screen it comes from, in which application, or it could be just a high-level definition, whatever's appropriate for the users that you're supporting. But just make sure that they have that resource they can fall back on, because no one wants to click and drag a field onto a report and feel good about themselves and then realize actually that field doesn't mean what you think it means. So support your users and make it predictable and consistent. It's kind of important to introduce an element of consistency to your reporting as well. And you might have noticed the widget code demo has that little drop-down box on top for selecting the month. And there's two other demos as well, which I can briefly show you, that also have that drop-down box on the top. So a user of widget code knows when they go to see a report in Power BI, they can expect that because all of widget code's data is aggregated around the month end, they can select that month end at the top of the report, and that's usually going to be there. And that creates a dependability and reliability that sort of makes it easier for people to know what to expect, so there's no surprises. And this is my favorite Einstein quote: "Not everything that counts can be counted, and not everything that can be counted counts." And the reason I've included that is because I really want to sort of stress that Power BI and BI in general isn't a magic bullet, but it's a really good place to start in order to get you on the road to understanding the shape of things. It's a really good place to start building out your gut instinct. Just quickly before we go on to the Q&A, I'll talk to you briefly about our Power BI Quickstart product. What we'll do is we'll actually go on site for a day and talk to the key users of your data, talk to you about the types of data sources that you want to be interrogating, and maybe help you select a KPI or something like that that's important to you. And then we'll work to deliver a functional prototype of that and train you how to use it a little bit, show you how to do your own self-service reporting around that prototype, and deliver a quick high-level roadmap on the next logical areas of where you should be looking in order to build out the reporting. That's our quick start. So now that I've gone through all of that, I'll open the floor up to questions. I have one question here. Is a data warehouse always necessary? It's short answer is no, of course not. Data warehouses are absolutely fantastic, and they're really great when it comes to integrating data together, particularly from different sources. They're not necessary, particularly if we're in a scenario where, for example, we're just pointing at a set of SurveyMonkey questions, or we're doing a little one-shot little piece of interrogation that we just want to quickly get an answer to and point to the data source, pull the data and answer it. But I would definitely recommend it if you're looking at a scenario where you want to roll out gradually using this iterative design pattern I was talking about. So in order to make sure that you're in a position where you can take the next piece of data and roll it in, I would recommend starting with even just a very, very lightweight data warehouse. Okay. On ClickView versus Power BI, yeah. Which one is better? Look, I don't know which is better. They both serve sort of different angles on the whole thing. If you're looking to empower users the way I was showing you in the click and drag UI, I would definitely sort of recommend Power BI as the way to go, simply because it's sort of got that familiar interface, and there isn't a huge learning curve in order for people to be able to pick it up and to run with it. But ClickView, on the other hand, has other advantages in that it can be more flexible with its charting types, or it can be, you can actually build an entire data warehouse using the ClickView scripting language under the hood itself. So you might not need to build a separate data warehouse if you're coming from a Click world. So it really depends on your use case scenarios and what kind of outputs you want to get from it and who your end users are going to be. Okay. Any other questions from anyone at the moment? Okay, well, look, I think I'll leave it there. So I'd like to thank everyone very much for attending, and I hope everyone got some good value from the session. And feel free to contact us directly after the webinar if you want to know more information about anything. My name is Bill Coleman. It's been a pleasure talking to you today. Thank you very much.